Welcome, everybody, to our live program here from Capital Technology University. My name is Brad Sims. I'm the president of Capital Tech, and we're a small private STEM university located just north of Washington, D.C. We do have aviation programs as well as cyber and engineering and construction. So I like to bring industry experts onto our Cap Tech Live. And today we have Erika Armstrong. She's not only a pilot, she's an author, and so much more. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Hey, everybody. Erika Armstrong. I've been in aviation for about 30 years. The 30-second overview, I started off in, Part 91 aviation, flying for the Red Cross. Got into the charter business aviation. Worked there for many years, flew about 28 different airplanes. Got hired in at the airlines and airline captain. And then, of course, another merger happened, so I got laid off there and put back into business aviation, but got interested into pilot training. And so I'm in pilot training right now in the Part 135 world, and love talking about flying and airplanes. So glad to be here today, and hopefully you guys will ask some questions.
Thanks, and I will take Q&A. If you want to enter in the chat area, we can answer some questions as we go along. So as billed today, we want to start talking about the pilot shortage, which is huge out there. I did look up the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and they're only showing that the pilot shortage is not as bad as we see in the news, but I tend to believe it's quite different. So let's get your take on what you think about the pilot shortage.
Okay. Yeah. So we have another 8 hours, right? So, it is a large conversation, right? There's many layers. It's a very deep topic. So today we'll just talk about the primary things that are driving it. It's not for lack of people who want to be pilots. So we'll just start with that, getting that straight. But if you do look at the numbers and you look at the trends of where it's been going, in 1980, I think was probably the peak of what we saw out there for people coming in to be pilots. We had something like 800,000 people with some level of aviation training, student pilot all the way up to ATP in the 1980s. Now you're looking at a population of about 600,000 and about, much less than that who are ATPs. So just the sheer number of people that are even going out and just bombing around in a private airplane has dwindled. So that sets the standard for being able to draw from that pool of people. So, you can even take another step back and look at kind of where the whole industry plateaued, the glory days of aviation, right? Kind of that whole descent started when deregulation started, right? We let capitalism take over purely, supply and demand, and just watching it evolve over the years, right? So, and we used to have a lot of pilots coming in from the military, and we just don't see that anymore. Military has done a pretty good job of keeping their pilots, giving them incentives to stay in, so that funnel has kind of dwindled up. And of course, the airlines, this entire time, even right now, they've had the honor of having all of these pilots come to them already with experience and hours and training. And so, they knock on their airline door, and these pilots are already ready to go. So it's that in between. The regional airlines, they're the ones that really see it. And I think one of the things we don't really talk about, first of all, it's expensive. It always has been, always will be. It's always going to be the biggest barrier for men and women equally. It doesn't matter. Airlines now are doing a few aviation academies. It's still a perception. It still costs a lot of money. It's kind of like almost like a training contract now, where you just sign away your firstborn and your house and everything else in exchange for pilot training. But the airlines are now starting to do it, but it takes a long time to build a pilot. So it's always going to be expensive. But the other thing that's affecting it, which we don't talk about much, is the whole element of business aviation, this whole sector that has quietly grown over the years. There's about 15,000 business aircraft right now, and think about all that percentage of pilots that are flying in that sector. And what's been happening is it's expensive, obviously, in business aviation too, to train somebody. So through many years, I mean, you used to work on food stamps, but they've all, these leaders have realized it costs a lot of money to train a pilot, so let's incentivize them to keep them there. So a lot of the pilots that maybe would have come through the pipeline in through business aviation, then out to the airlines, a lot of them are staying. I actually talked to a pilot last week who was with the airlines, and he actually left to come back into business aviation. So if you sit down and run the numbers of a lifelong career, it's hard because this economy changes like every 7-8 years. We have an ebb and flow, but business aviation now is offering enough incentives for somebody to make an entire career out of it. What makes you happy in aviation is going to be really different. A lot of people find that they like the business side of it. You get great layovers. You're flying the best of the best for equipment. You're, interesting people. So sometimes that's maybe better than doing the trips to Detroit, St. Louis, Dallas, and Minneapolis in a day. So a lot of different things that are being offered out there.
Yeah, and we have a question. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here. Has medical transport or organ transport flights been impacted? Are there entrepreneurial opportunities in these areas?
Yeah, so I actually started my career as an air ambulance pilot. I flew King Airs, all 90, 100, and 200s, and then really enjoyed the air ambulance flying. And we had a Citation S2, couple twos. And so that is a constant, but yet you can never predict, the air ambulance how often you'll be flying. But there's a ton of companies out there, and for my new students, I highly recommend that they actually look for their local air ambulance companies. A lot of the equipment they fly, like King Airs, those airplanes only require one pilot, but the FAA certifies them under certain rules and regulations, and a lot of times the FAA requires them to have two pilots. So there's an opportunity for somebody to get into the right seat of an airplane that doesn't really need you there and to log those hours. So as far as impacting it, that's one segment that probably, is still needing qualified pilots. The insurance companies really set the industry standard. So to meet those minimum qualifications, you still have to have a certain amount of hours depending on the equipment. But I'm sure that a segment is still looking for pilots, but I would say that there's enough in that segment that it hasn't become a huge impact for them. So as far as entrepreneurial opportunities in these areas, there's a lot of companies that have been doing it for a long time. They do it really well. It's kind of that balance between fixed wing and rotorcraft that we were, most of them require both of those. Depending on what it is. So a lot of times I'd be flying the airplane to an airport closer to a major airport or major hospital, and then the ambulance helicopter would be there to take them over right to the hospital. So most of these flight departments have both, but yeah, there's always opportunity out there. So if you have any further questions, more detailed, I can just email me and I'll see what else I can do for you.
And whenever, of course, at Capital Tech, we have a fixed wing pilot program as a bachelor's degree. It is, obviously the cost to be trained as a pilot is expensive, whether you go to a flight school or a community college. The other thing that I think folks don't always know is that if you're going to rotary, usually it's twice as much money to be trained as a rotary pilot. So there is an expense behind it. At the bachelor's degree, the FAA a few years ago made where if you're Part 141, both at the flight school and the curriculum, that you as a student only need 1,000 hours of flight time. You don't need the 1,500 hours with the bachelor's degree. And now I've read some other things currently because of the shortage of pilots that there's thoughts of other ways that they may alter things, even the age of retirement. What's your thoughts about the whole requirement of hours before you can fly commercially and it changing into the other regulations?
Yeah, there's a lot of Band-Aids out there. I think we often have a knee-jerk reaction to try to fix a problem right at this particular moment. The age 67 is out there now. When I talk to pilots in general, you see a lot of career fatigue. So I think, especially too, better pilots that are ready to upgrade are now thinking, oh my gosh, now all these captains are going to stay in that seat for another couple of years. But you know, pull all the politics and all the legislation aside, at the end of the day, we don't care about anything except safety. So really, when you start talking about having these conversations, you really have to put up those walls and say, okay, we need to exclude everything else. I don't care if we have a pilot shortage. We need to do what's right for the industry and for the passengers sitting behind, those pilots. What's the best thing for that? And if it means having to cancel a few flights, then so be it. So it's hard. Airlines are led by accountants, right? That's at the end of the day, they're balancing their P&Ls, right? So everything down the line, that's where all the filters go in having to create an organization that ultimately is safe. So, the 1,500-hour rule was a reaction to the Colgan Air crash. And if you research the Colgan Air crash, hours really had nothing to do with it. It went back to some training elements that were in there, not having a pilot record database to track training to see if a pilot was having issues in the past, if they'd failed a bunch of check rides and they're still getting through the system. We definitely learn from our mistakes. Sometimes it takes some time. Sometimes we overshoot the goal. So, throughout my career, I've been able to witness that hours do not equal skill or ability. So there's a lot of pilots out there that maybe only have 500 hours that are much better than somebody with 1,500 hours. So, we have to, put a little common sense in there. But as far as the airlines, I don't think you're going to see a change for the 1,500-hour rule. We set that bar up there, and I just don't think anyone's willing to lower it and take that chance, right? Because we still want skill and experience up there. But there are a ton of other things we can do. I know it's one of the offers up there, but I'll be very surprised if they change that rule. And I just wanted to quick mention one more thing about the rotorcraft thing. When we're looking at the future, you were talking about helicopters. The weird thing is that, like, of the last 500 students I've had in my ground schools, there's only 2 of them that wanted to be helicopter pilots. But you look at what's upcoming, like all the eVTOLs, all that technology, it's kind of that helicopter rotorcraft skill set. We are not prepared for that. We haven't been training pilots for that type of thought process. So it'll be interesting to see how that now adds a gap into the training process too. So.
Yes. Here at Capital Tech, we launched our bachelor's degree for pilot fixed wing this year to try to help cover some of the market demand. We already have a bachelor's degree in unmanned systems. And so we do level 1 training here, but we have partnered with Textron where you can get level 2 and 3 if you really want to do that unmanned systems. But I think the demand, as you see in both areas, is just tremendous, right? We can't keep up with whether it's unmanned or fixed wings pilots. It's just an area where you can have a great career. But I did notice here on one of our comments, the long hours and irregular schedules of being a pilot can be a deterrent. Now, what's your thought on that?
Absolutely. So, when we look at flight attendants too, when we talk, especially when we do the breakdown of men and women in the industry, right? We're still lacking women desperately. I think we're at about 5% of the commercial airline world, maybe 7 at some of the airlines. Less than 1% of them are captains. So, it's still frustrating to see those numbers. It takes a generation or 2 to change perspective, so it's getting there. It's the nature of the beast. You're never going to be able to change that, right? So you need to have an honest conversation for people coming into this industry while they're young. I tell these, 18, 19-year-old kids, oh, someday you're going to want to have a family and kids. And they're like, never, that's never going to happen, right? But it does. So then you look at your career differently and, trying to make that balance. There just isn't that balance in aviation. And so you're going to have to just right up front embrace that idea and make sure that you have those really hard conversations with your family, your future spouse, on what that looks like. We can talk about it, but then the first day that you're on, you're out in Minot, North Dakota on a Christmas by yourself, all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I'm, not really enjoying this career. So you have to have a honest self-evaluation of yourself and what you're, willing to do, and just have that recognition. Even senior pilots, they have to fly the red eyes. A lot of those long haul pilots, they depart at 10 o'clock at night. If you're not a night owl, if you can't function at night, or in the morning, with an alarm clock, you really have to consider your choices. So those are all the things you need to think about beyond just going out and flying the airplane. If you want to make this a career, it's a good thing to have that conversation up front.
Yeah, I agree. It's my background is I went into construction management, industrial construction, and I mean, it's long hours and you moved around a lot. So, you really have to think it through before you invest in that career path, right?
Yeah, I had 6 bases in 2 years. So, yeah, it's a lot of extra time.
I think we touched upon this. Do you think the FAA will reduce the 15-hour requirement? Probably not, right?
No, I don't see it happening. The reality in my mind, I think they should have found a happy medium. At the time, the minimum was 250 hours. That was woefully too little. But then to bump it up to 1,500 hours, I mean, that's just no in between. And it really was the final nail in the coffin for the pilot shortage. That gap there of training time, just extending it that much farther. We lost a ton of pilots not wanting to continue on. You just getting to 1,500 hours. I remember at 800 hours of thinking about quitting the industry. I didn't have enough hours to get a job, but I put in so much time and effort already, and I'm like, maybe it's just never going to happen. So, hopefully we're going to find some other ways to use pilots with these lower time for other segments of the aviation industry. And working with insurance companies to allow that to happen. But in the airline world, I don't think you're going to see that reduction. You may see some compromising in some other segments of it, but not for the 121 world. I don't think so.
Well, here at Capital Tech, we're located right between DC and Baltimore, and I grew up in the Midwest. So if you go and you learn to fly in 2 different locations, right, is there an advantage to being in a major metropolitan area versus being out in the middle of the Midwest? Is that a plus in what you're learning, or is it about the same?
Oh, no, that's actually a good question. I learned how to fly at a tower-controlled airport. I learned at Flying Cloud in Minnesota. See, I can get that accent just like that. So we were under the airspace of Minneapolis International. So not only was I learning how to fly an airplane, but now I had to learn how to communicate and talk on the radio. And that is hard when you're first learning. You just don't know who you're talking to. So you'll find that students under this busy airspace sometimes take a little bit longer. So there's some advantages and disadvantages. You really learn how to, talk quick, listen very clearly, get yourself into traffic patterns. But then if you're learning at a non-towered airport, just think about all the ability to, have more depthful thought about what you're doing and flying, and being able to stay in the traffic pattern, just do touch and goes, over and over again. And in the bad weather, maybe they don't have a lot of services. You learn how to fuel your own airplane. It's a little different mindset from one to the other. But then when it comes to actually getting a job, aviation is all about networking. It really is. I'd say probably 80% of the business aviation jobs are never posted. It's word of mouth. So it's really important that if you have a local, any type of like NBAA organization, to be part of that, and just, make sure you're networked out there.
Between the commercial side and the business side, what would you say are the major differences if you choose either one of those career paths?
They're so different. They really are. Now that I've spent many years in business aviation and many years in the airline world, don't tell anybody, but I really enjoyed the business aviation flying much better. It took me going to the airlines to really get that contrast. But you have to self-evaluate again on what makes you happy. business aviation, you are so much more on your own. Once you leave, you're responsible. You do the catering. Sometimes you clean the toilets. You do all of that stuff, and you're working with C-suite individuals that are high demand. When you tell them, hey, I can't get into Aspen today, and they're like, I have a meeting at 2:00. You need to get me there. You have to have a different mindset and personality to communicate with these people. But the flying in business aviation was great. I got to go down to Australia and New Zealand and all the great places. But the drawback is that I would also get called at 2:00 in the morning saying, hey, we need to leave at 6 a.m. You need to be there. But it's gotten so much better. There's a ton of charter companies now that operate just like an airline. You have days on, days off. They're set. They're, just like airline world. A lot of them you get to live at home now, and they just fly you to the airplane wherever it's, when your 10 days on comes on, they get you to the airplane. A little bit more work-life balance. So it's a tough one. But 95% of my students, they all want to go to the airline. So I try to divert some of them into the business aviation world first, to at least try it.
Should the potential employee go to the conferences for the business aviation? Is that a good place to network?
It absolutely is. Yeah, the NBAA, the big one every year. I think now it used to be in Orlando and Las Vegas. It's in Las Vegas now for the next 5 years or something like that. But in every state, there's a local chapter of it. So yeah, the 99s, if you're a woman out there, women in aviation, all those little, groups out there. Now that COVID's lifted, yeah, man, get out there, shake hands, do those fly-ins. That's the way to do it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, so at Capital Tech, one of our first degrees we added was in aviation cybersecurity. Now, I think of that actually affecting both either an airplane or the airport, can be damaging in either case. What's your fears around cybersecurity issues as a pilot?
Yeah, I've seen some headline news about some guy sitting in the back and hacking into the airplane systems. Unless there's some other technology that's coming along out there, I don't think that you can do that right now. But it's definitely a concern, especially as we expand our communication abilities. The big thing that has been quietly burbling is we have this CPDLC. It's basically text messaging for pilots. So a lot of airports now, you can get your clearance, and you don't even have to talk on the radio anymore. That's really, it'll clear up a lot of communication issues down the road. But any type of interference like that is always a concern. So, even something simple when they went onto the 5G network. I have been flying an airplane. This is early days, I'll give you that. But the captain and I were sitting there. We're trying to do an approach, and all of a sudden something was coming through our headsets. And we realized it was our passenger in the back. We were hearing his phone conversation. And so, any type of interference, I know everybody's like, why do we have to all turn off our phones? Well, I just don't know what 250 phones coming on at the same time might do if somebody's shooting an instrument approach. Mm-hmm. So it's little things like that you have to be on the lookout for. But there's also big concerns out there. So that's why I'm glad you have degrees like you have for people to think of the unthinkable. What are those things that we can't even imagine? Somebody just stole my credit card number yesterday. So I got a phone call. I went to the gas station and my card is declined. So if somebody can still hack my credit card numbers, any type of communication interference is a concern.
As a pilot, issues such as not only birds, but let's say drones flying around, or what we've heard about lasers. Is there any fear as a pilot for those getting in your way, that you're more cautious than you used to be, or is it just not really that much of a challenge you're worried about?
No, all that just ticks me off. I just to think that people are out there doing that. Oh man, I want them to track those people down. Drones is definitely a concern. It's not a matter of if, it's when. it's hard because we don't want to over-regulate everything, right? But we also want to make sure that anybody that has a drone understands at least the airspace. You know, if you really look at it, there's not that much airspace that we have to share with drones. So just keep them away from that one little segment of our world. That's all they're asking. So anytime I see one going up like at LAX, and I'm like, come on, people, that's a big sky out there. There's no reason for those two to be in the same space. The laser strikes, man, what I can't remember. It was like 6,500 just last year alone. I can't even imagine. Um, I was at a safety conference about 2 years ago, and I talked to a pilot who actually lost his career from a laser strike. So um, I think the industry is doing a better job of tracking down, and now with the punishments coming up in jail time, hopefully that word will get out there, and just will get those idiots off the. Yeah, and maybe we'll have to start registering lasers. Anything that's capable of harming somebody up in an airplane, we're just going to have to, make it harder for them to get it. So that's why we can't have nice things, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Let's just cover our last question here before we run out of time. It's about the cost of training as a pilot. Do you think there's any other way that they're going to help finance that? From the university's perspective, we give out scholarships first, and then whatever is left over, financial aid does cover the flight fees as far as that goes. And if you're a veteran, VA does cover your flight fees as well. I'm not sure. You may know more of any initiatives out there, but I haven't seen anything coming out of the government to help cover flight training costs.
Well, yeah, one of the things we can do, and I think a few states have already done this, is making sure that anybody who has like a 529 college plan can be used for any flight school. There's there was the idea came out there, but then they threw up all these other rules to it. I'm sorry, if you have a 529 or anything saved up for a college, that should be used for any A&P school, Part 61, 141. It doesn't matter. That should be easy to use your education funds, not just for the universities. I know there's a lot of power there because the universities want that, but we need to do a better job of letting parents decide where that money goes to. The other thing we can do a lot better job on, and I know people think it's a swear word, but training contracts. I did a training contract because I wanted to get into the jets. So I told my employer that, I was ready for the upgrade. So they actually walked me down to the bank, got a loan for my training. They would pay it as long as I stayed there. And I actually had to pay them to quit a little bit later because I kept trying to get into other jets. So I kept signing training contracts, but there is a way to do it. Everybody's like, well, we don't need training contracts. We have a pilot shortage. But I've been on the other side of the P&L statement. I've been in the management side. I understand that these are businesses, so there has to be some give and take. So if somebody's going to put $70,000 into a type rating on a Falcon for you, there's an obligation there. So I have no problem with that. So being a little bit more creative with that, but pilots also have to understand, hey, you may want to leave at the end of that because you're going to get a better job. So you're going to have to pay to leave. But that's an honest conversation for both sides.
No, that sounds like a reasonable deal. Let's bring up your website here real quick. This is your first book, and I see on the website you are working on a second book, or is it released yet?
No, I'm working on it. Yeah, it takes a long process to get through it all, but I'm slogging through it. I'm actually I've got a manuscript that I've been working on. So I had sold to a movie studio right before COVID, but during COVID everything got dumped. So yeah, most of my energy is going for that right now.
So just scroll through that. So anything specifically you want to highlight on your website?
Besides the fact that I haven't kept up with it very well. No, but if anybody has any questions, you guys can find me on LinkedIn or Erika at achickinthecockpit.com. You're welcome to email me any questions you want. If you're a brand new student trying to figure out where to go, what to do, just give a holler. Every morning, that's how I start my day, is answering questions. So feel free to email me, and yeah, look forward to seeing you all out there.
Yeah, I see your email address is on your website, so
Yep,
just
yep. Give a holler.
yes. All right. So we are running out of time here, and it's 30 minutes. So I'll just again thank everybody. Thank Erika mostly for being on our Cap Tech live today. If you are interested in anything about Capital Technology University, hit us up here at our website, captechu.edu. And so I do have one last question for you. What's your favorite plane you fly?
It depends on the mission, but I tell you what, nothing tops the 727. That's my favorite. Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. Make sure you email Erika or check her out on LinkedIn. And we are happy that you visited with us today for 30 minutes. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.